Hello chess friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video, I shall take you to the through the round 2 of the Tata Steel Chess Masters. As you know, there are some really wonderful games being played here. And yeah, I'm not really covering too many games because they are really worth checking out. Do check out those games. I'm going to try to create more videos. But this one is going to be focused on the game Magnus Carlsen versus Anish Giri. So as all of you know, Magnus Carlsen has a new target, a new goal, and that is to achieve a reading of 2900, which is incredibly difficult because when he defeats his opponents, I think he gets only half a point, 1 point, or 2 points. That's the best he gets because he's the highest rated player, and it's very difficult for him to make 2900, or for anyone, of course, because victory doesn't give you too many points, but if you lose a game, you lose some critical points. So that's why it's such a difficult task. It's obviously possible. It takes a herculean it's a herculean task. So these are the three things we're going to learn from this game, and this is why I'm going to show you this, because it is very instructive, this game. The first thing you're going to learn is to create imbalance. Creating imbalance is one of the best ways of creating a victorious position. It's not easy to create victory. It's not easy to win games. These guys are so close to each other. They are defensively so good and so excellent that sometimes you have to play. Not sometimes, I think most probably these guys keep finding novelties and keep taking their opponents into new positions. That is the only way to create a victory at this particular level, of course. So creating imbalance is one thing we're going to learn. Second thing is super important, that is material versus activity versus tempo. With tempo I mean gain of time. So third one is weakness of the last move, and this is also going to be critical. So you're going to pay attention on this three, and we'll come back and look at it in more detail. But let's dive into the game right away. Magnus with white starts the game with d4, the queen's pawn opening, knight to f6, c4, e6. We might have his nimzo, but Magnus dodges it with knight f3, d5, and he plays g3 over here. So you can see the world championship preparation is still on, and of course there are many ideas that were not tried in the world championship because it was so early. So Magnus gets an upper hand because he has all this preparation backed up. So bishop to e7, bishop g2, castles, both sides castle, and now black captures the pawn on c4. Now there are multiple ways to regain the pawn, but Magnus plays a very interesting move over here, which directly creates an imbalance in the position. Knight to a3. Now, if an 1800 player would have played this is 1600, it would have directly called as a bad move. Yeah, you wanna obviously regain your pawn, but the problem is he can just capture and double your pawns, and these are ugly pawns on the a file. So if a normal player would have played this move, it would have been termed as bad, but Magnus plays it. And why does he do it? Well, he does it to create an imbalance, a very interesting imbalance of material. White's threat is obviously to regain the pawn, and after that he's gonna have a very good control on the center, specifically the e5 square. Anish decides to take the knight on a3. This is pretty interesting. Now we have a direct imbalance after b takes. Well, there are obviously give and takes. The biggest thing that has happened is black has exchanged his bishop for the knight on a3. So white is going to have the advantage of the two bishops. That's the biggest thing you're gonna notice in this game. Yes, these pawns are doubled. They are ugly. If Magnus can't make use of it, then they are definitely weaknesses. But Magnus, we'll see what Magnus does of it. Another thing that has happened is the b file has been opened up, so white can put some pressure on the b file and make it uncomfortable for black to develop freely. Well, but we still have a material imbalance. First of all, a knight for a bishop. Secondly, black is still up a pawn. So let's see how the game continues. Is black's move. Black plays bishop to d7. The idea is very simple. You want to develop the bishop on c6 and challenge the bishop on g2, which is quite an excellent piece for white. Now, here is a very interesting move. Magnus really understands these positions very well, and he realizes, well, I can't have these weaknesses for a long time. I need to deal with those, and I need to use them for my advantage. So he starts pushing a4. He does not let the pawn stay and rot on a3. Instead, he pushes it, and now this is quite an interesting idea. It does a few things. It stops ideas like bishop b5, bishop a6, so the pawn does not get a defender. At the same time, you also stop b5. But obviously, the major idea is very similar to the French defense. When Fischer used to play this pawn move a4, I think in the whenever or something, and then he used to continue with the bishop to a3, bringing the bishop to this excellent diagonal. That is the in fact the main plan, and you have to use your disadvantage as well. This is the best thing about Magnus. He uses every single one of his piece to its potential. Even the bad pawn on a3 is going to be used now. So here comes bishop c6. Well, Anish does solve the problem of his pieces. He's going to have he will not have any difficulty developing his pieces. This knight will probably come here, and then maybe he'll play rook e8 and try to go for this, or knight b6, knight d5. Basically, black is all right here. Now comes bishop to a3. Magnus uses this diagonal for the bishop. The bishop is very active. Rook to e8, queen to c2. So we are threatening to take back the pawn at some point. Now comes knight bd7. Magnus does not hurry. He just plays rook a to c1. This is very important. Sometimes you can directly, the material you have is for a limited amount of time. Now, right now, playing something like knight b6, well, we can simply answer that with the pawn move to a5. The pawn is pretty useful, and then we can take on c4. So it's not that the pawn is going anywhere. It's pretty safe. Now comes pawn to a6. Finally, we take the pawn. So, materially speaking, we are equal, but now something interesting is going to happen. Knight to b6, queen to c3. The knight or the queen was attacked. Queen decides to go back, and here comes knight takes on a4. I think bishop takes can simply be answered with the move queen into c7 or something like that, or even just knight e5. It's all good. But knight takes on a4, and this is the main section I want to show you. This is when Magnus starts playing too good. First, queen to b3. Well, the threat is very simple. Rook takes c6, getting rid of the defender and winning the knight on a4. Very simple threat. Well, Anish defends that with queen to d5. Now, how do you continue here? Magnus plays a tremendous move here, which is really impressive. So, white to play, find the move. Well, as we said, creating imbalance is one of the key ideas in winning the game because there is a disruption. It's not very symmetrical. But this move is very impressive. Rook into c6. Well, what's the point? If you take back, then I'll take the knight on a4, and if you just take this, this is quite a great position. Just takes, and I think, well, this is hanging, of course. So white's gonna have definitely a very good position. Black decides, why can't I just capture a rook? What's wrong with that? Now I'm up a pawn and I'm also up exchange. Black is materially speaking doing very well, but this is where the second thing is going to come in action. So look at this now. The one thing we saw is creating imbalance. There is a definite imbalance of material. There is a definite disruption in the material. But the second thing is very important. Black has the material, but there are two more elements in an advantage, and those are activity and gain of time, gain of tempo. So let's go back. You can look at this position. Well, black is definitely having the material advantage, but who has the activity? Who has the gain of time and gain of tempo? I'll just show you. Just look at this move. Knight to e5. Look at this bishop cutting across the boards. These are beautiful bishops. This is a beautiful knight on e5. Rook is going to come on c1 or on b1. Who has the activity? Definitely Magnus has the activity. Who has the gain of time? Well, knight e5 does gain time. So white is developing his pieces with gain of time, with gain of tempo. So white has two advantages, and black has one advantage, that is material advantage. Now the queen can't really step away because the knight still needs defense. So black just plays queen to b5. Totally normal move. Do you really want to exchange when you're down? You don't. So Magnus just keeps the queen on the board and making sure that there are still targets. Whenever you make a move, make sure it has a threat. It should not be a null move. It should not be something that does not create threat at all. Queen c2 is an excellent move because we are putting a question to the black piece, is not letting him have his free choice. This pawn is attacked. Obviously this is also attacked, because if queen takes, there is simple queen takes on e4. So there are multiple threats over here, but definitely Magnus has achieved something good here. Knight to d5, and look at this, rook to b1, activating every single one of his pieces. This is tremendous. This rook, this bishop cutting across the board. and this excellent position of the knight. Obviously, remember the knight is attacking a very crucial f7 point. That is a weak pawn, and it's not very easy to defend this. You either have to push it, which create weaknesses, or you have to go to f8. That's not easy because there is a bishop here. So there is a lot of pressure in the position, and I think Magnus Carlsen's World Championship preparation is showing up. So queen to a5 being played, and now this is where the transformation of advantage happens. White has a advantage in activity. Now let's see how this activity gets converted into material advantage. And he also has the bishop pair, and one of the advantages of having the bishop pair is you can give it up at the right moment. One of the bishops. There comes bishop into d5. Well, queen takes is not possible, as you can take on a4. The knight on a4 needs protection. So pawn takes, and rook takes on b7. Excellent move. What has just happened here? Magnus has traded one of his advantages, that was activity, and into another advantage, and that is material. So he does get his material back. In fact, he's going to get more material now. This is hanging. This is under a lot of pressure. And of course, the biggest weakness is the pawn on f7. And this is where I think Anish slightly went wrong. Pawn to c5. I don't know if there is a better move, but this position already looks very difficult. The problem is the rook on a8 has never moved at all till now, and the knight on a4 is kind of trapped. It's not really trapped; it can move, but it's very difficult to find a good square for the knight. It's cornered, and knight on the rim is dim, right? So pawn to c5. What's the now? This is where we look at the third thing in the position. So let me just show you the third part. The third thing is weakness of the last move. Every move creates an has an advantage. At the same time, it creates a vulnerability. There is a liability it has. So let us look at what is the weakness of the last move. What's the weakness of this move? Well, it exposes the f7 pawn even further. But right now, obviously, you can't take, because if takes, then he takes the knight, which is the defender, and takes the rook. But better is queen to f5, building up a huge pressure on this. It's This is not an easy position at all. In fact, there are multiple threats. You can't play f6, that creates too many weaknesses, and there are tactics to follow. He just plays rook to f8, keeping his position solid, trying to keep it solid. But obviously, there are three attackers on the f7 pawn and only two defenders. So yes, it is possible to capture. Knight takes. Now it's not really good to play any of the move. For example, g6 just runs into knight h6 followed by a mate. Something like h6 is equally bad, because I think maybe just queen g6 works with the threat of knight. Let me just show you an example. For example, this is just for an example. Just takes here, and well, that's a simple mate, isn't it? So you can't really push the g pawn and the h pawn. It turns out that there is not much that can be done. So Anish plays this tricky move, queen to d8. So basically, if you take his queen, he's gonna take back, and he's gonna fight for some chances. But Magnus, in such positions, here Magnus never goes wrong. He will always find the best, smoothest continuations, and that's what he does here. What is the weakness of the last move? Queen d8. The weakness of the last move is the pawn on c5 was less defended. The queen on a5 was defending the pawn. Now it's not, so you can just capture it. Only the knight is the defender, and this is pretty strong pawn. The pawn can advance and create a serious threat. That also opens up our bishop, which will bring more attackers in the game. Two more attackers. That's wonderful. So here comes queen f6. Anish realizes that he needs to pull the brake. He needs to do something, otherwise he's going to be in big trouble. He goes for exchanging queens, and Magnus says, "Well, there are ways to avoid it, but why should I avoid it? Why shouldn't I go in an endgame which is totally winning?" And Magnus is one of the strongest players in the endgame, probably the strongest player at the moment. He's when it comes to endgames, he's as good as Fischer or Capablanca. I would consider him as good as both of these legendary players. So queen takes on f6. She takes. Magnus transforms his advantage from one part to another. Now he not only has activity, but he's soon going to have a big amount of material. So here we go. Knight at 6, king at 8. Um, if you solve some puzzles like helpmate or something, you'll realize, or you just use your creativity, you'll realize, just put the bishop on the f6 square or anywhere on this diagonal, and it will be threatening mate. For example, let me just show you. Magnus plays the excellent move, pawn to c6. He uses every single one of his trump cards immediately. The real idea is obviously to unleash the bishop. Let me just show you what happens if black goes wrong. Something like this. This is horrible move, but of course, it demonstrates my point. Bishop here, here, and that would be a mate. So there's a very interesting construction, and it's very possible. In fact, the bishop can also switch to this diagonal in case the knight moves. You can really go to this diagonal and also create mating threats. So this is the point. All white needs to do here is to go use his bishop and go to this diagonal. So can Magnus do it? Let's see. Well, Anish plays accurately. He plays rook to c8, stopping this idea, because now if you go bishop e7, just rook into c6 stops, because basically it's protect. Let me just show you here. Basically, it just protects the f6 square. So for the moment, this idea is not applicable, but definitely it's in the air. Magnus says, okay, you want to go to the c6 square, I'll not let you, I'll just push my pawn. Now I'm again threatening the move bishop e7, bishop f6, winning the game completely. Well, black again is in a serious trouble. Knight to c3. And as what's the weakness of the last move? That's the third point, right? The weakness of the last move is the knight was controlling the b2 square. Now it's not. So you go bishop b2. If the knight moves, it's going to be horrible. Just takes king f1. And there is this threat of, let me just show you. This. It's quite horrible. Just this threat of bishop takes f6, followed, and even capturing this knight. Multiple threats, no way to defend. It's pretty bad. So bishop to b2 played, excellent move. Anish tries to defend, hold on tightly onto his life with d4. But obviously, Magnus now very simply converts his advantage activity again into material advantage. Knight f7, king comes out, knight d6. He wants to get back his exchange with interest, of course. So king to g6, the king moves away, just preempting any kind of threats. Now comes king to f1. This is a class move. It shows Magnus has the upper hand in the position. It's a symbolic move that shows that Magnus is the one controlling the game. He could have just captured the rook, but he's like, well, the rook is not going anywhere. Why should I hurry up? Why is there a need to capture the rook immediately? I can capture it whenever I want. So he just plays king f1. This shows control. This shows power. Excellent move. Now comes knight to b5. Now Magnus says, okay, I'll capture it. Takes, and after all of this, bishop takes on d4, knight e6, bishop b3. This is the point where Anish Giri resigned. You can see this is a very nice construction. Always keep your bishop two steps away from the knight, and that way you're dominating this squares. You can see knight is dominated, bishop does not allow knight total freedom, and at the same time the bishop is also controlling the c1 square, so the rook is not allowed to go here. Basically, it's 2 pawns down. Rook b6 is coming, attacking more targets. This is weak. This is h7 is also weak. It's nearly impossible to defend such a position, isolated pawn, such a position against the world champion. Specifically when he is 2 pawns ahead, he has a bishop for a knight and a super active rook. It's basically Anish Giri respects his opponent. He knows that he trusts Magnus's skills, and he knows that Magnus is going to win this, being 2 pawns up. This is completely winning endgame, and he respectfully resigns here. What a great crushing game! I think Magnus just shows us how to convert one advantage into the other so smoothly. At one point, let me just show you the main thing, which was very impressive. At this point, you can see Magnus first of all exchanged and made a big material imbalance. First of all, there was a knight versus a bishop imbalance, but this just gives up the exchange, and there is an even bigger material imbalance. But after this, we see the three advantages. Black has the material advantage, only one advantage, but white has activity and gain of tempo. Look at how beautifully white activates his pieces. Just rook b1, every single one of his pieces so beautifully placed, and one advantage can be converted into another advantage. It can be transformed, and that's what Magnus does. He knows that activity is not something artificial. It can actually be used, and this is a beautiful transformation of advantage. Bishop into d5, beautiful move. Giving up the bishop pair, understanding that the position requires it, and converting his advantage so smoothly. This is just beautiful. And the third point was weakness of the last move. The pawn move c5 created weakness. captures, and weakness of the last move, as the queen moved back, he just captured back. And as we know, this pawn was super powerful. It also opened up this bishop. Totally great game. And obviously, last thing is, Magnus never hesitates to go in an endgame which is totally winning for him. He has very good understanding of this endgames, and that's what makes him such a powerful player. So I'll leave you with these three things. I hope you learned something from this video. Thank you for watching, and do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time.